Welcome to the Paul Adefarasin podcast. We revisit the word, surface the big ideas, and give you space to reflect, pray, and act. If you'd like the full message, though, you can watch it on YouTube or listen on Spotify after this episode.
So society is just completely obsessed with logic and memory, right? I mean, we measure intelligence by how fast you can calculate a math problem, or, how many historical dates you can memorize for a test.
Or very mechanical.
Exactly. Or like how flawlessly you can deduce an answer from a giant spreadsheet. But if you look closely at human progression, treating the brain like a hard drive or a biological calculator, it just misses the mark entirely.
Yeah, it really does.
So today we are pulling apart a masterclass on a very different idea. It's a framework that argues the least developed, but actually the most economically and spiritually lucrative faculty in the human mind is, well, it's the imagination.
Yeah, and this is such a fascinating deep dive for us today. We are dissecting a multi-layered sermon. It was delivered in June 2026 by Pastor Paul Adefarasin at House on the Rock in Lagos, Nigeria. And, the central thesis here is that unlocking the imagination is not about, it's not about daydreaming or just writing poetry.
Right, it's not just sitting under a tree.
Exactly. It is presented as a literal, actionable key to creating unimaginable value and wealth in the real world. So our objective for this deep dive is to distill that core message, explore the key scriptures anchoring these truths, and really emphasize the highly specific, practical, what he calls weekday work.
The weekday work, I love that.
Right. It's the homework assigned to listeners so you can apply this immediately.
Okay, so to understand how to actually build wealth or create economic value within this specific framework, we have to start with the foundational premise of human design. Like, looking at the creation story in the book of Genesis, there is this wild distinction made in how humans were formed versus, the rest of nature.
The contrast is honestly really stark. So the text outlines that when God created the broader environment, like the plants and the animals, the process was actually delegated to the elements.
Wait, delegated? What do you mean?
Yeah, so the command was given to the earth to, quote, bring forth animals and agriculture. And the water was commanded to bring forth fish and fowl. So the elements themselves were tasked with generating biological life.
Oh, wow. Okay, I never really thought about it like that.
Right. But then, when the narrative shifts to humanity, this is in Genesis 1.26, that delegation just stops completely.
Yeah.
God says, let us make man in our image and according to our likeness.
See, and I feel like a lot of people historically interpret that image as a physical resemblance, 2 arms, 2 legs, a face. But taking a step back, if God is understood as a spirit without a physical, biological body, that physical interpretation doesn't really hold up.
No, it doesn't at all. The image being referenced here is mental and creative capacity. It represents the mind of the creator specifically, that ability to imagine. And additionally, that phrase, let us, is pointed out in the sermon as a reflection of a triune nature.
Meaning multiple personalities working together?
Exactly. Multiple personalities working in perfect, unified collaboration. So that capacity for unification plus that boundless imagination, that is the actual image humans are made in.
It's like the human mind is the ultimate blueprint room. Like, if the creator is the master architect of the universe, the house wasn't just built and the keys handed over to us. A receiver was installed within human consciousness, which is the imagination, so we could download those blueprints and, continue the work of creation.
That's a perfect analogy. It is a mandate to be co-creators, not just inhabitants. And Genesis 2.7 really deepens this mechanic. When man is formed and God breathes into him, that breath is not framed as merely, biological oxygen to kickstart a respiratory system.
Right, it's not just CPR.
Exactly, not just CPR. It is the transmission of divine faculties. So humanity basically wakes up with imagination, communication, and unification already installed as default operating systems.
Wow. Installed from day one.
Yep. And this ties directly into a New Testament principle, too. In Ephesians 3.20 and 21, it says that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all we ask or think or imagine. The gospel itself is positioned as the activation software for this inherent power.
Okay, so if we all have this ultimate blueprint room inside our heads, and we're fully equipped to imagine exceedingly abundant outcomes, it raises a very frustrating question for a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, why are so many people completely exhausted, just struggling to survive and pay basic bills?
Yeah, and this is where the theological foundation of the sermon pivots really sharply into hard economics. The pastor breaks down a 4-tiered matrix of human value generation. to explain that exact disconnect, like why you can have the blueprint room but not actually produce wealth.
And just to be clear, value in this context explicitly includes financial wealth and money, right?
Yes, absolutely. But it's really important to note it is not framed as material greed. Wealth is defined here as a necessary tool. It's a resource required to build infrastructure, hospitals, roads, and cities.
Yeah. The example given is the immense untapped wealth of the African continent. Specifically, he notes that Nigeria has roughly 900 trillion cubic feet of gas underneath its soil.
Right. But having 900 trillion cubic feet of gas under your feet is economically useless if you cannot govern the resources between your ears.
Right.
Raw materials require intellectual property, vision, logistics to actually become valuable. You can't extract and distribute physical wealth without unlocking mental wealth first.
So let's break down this four-tiered matrix because this is fascinating. Level 1 is implementation. This is basically pure labor, using muscle and time to get a job done. And the estimate given for this level's earning potential is the lowest, roughly $20,000 to $80,000. And the logic is pretty simple. Muscle and time are strictly finite resources.
Right. There are only so many hours in a day.
Exactly. You can only work so many hours before your body physically gives out. You simply cannot create unlimited wealth using limited resources. You clock in, you clock out, you trade an hour for $1. But I do want to challenge a specific premise here, or at least play devil's advocate.
Go for it.
The framework suggests that this lowest level hard manual labor is actually the least spiritual tier. And it's even labeled as materialistic because the focus is solely on working for money to survive. But society generally praises hard manual labor as a deeply humble, noble virtue.
Yeah, for sure.
So calling it unspiritual just feels kind of counterintuitive.
It's a highly provocative stance. I completely agree. But the underlying psychology of the sermon makes sense when you dig into it. It is not a condemnation of honest, hard work. The argument is really about the restrictions of survival mode.
Okay, meaning what exactly?
Well, when you are operating at level 1, your cognitive load is entirely consumed by your own immediate biological needs. Paying rent, buying food, just surviving the week. True spiritual fulfillment in this specific paradigm requires reaching a level where your value creation serves humanity on a massive structural scale.
Ah, I see. So you're too busy surviving to build the infrastructure.
Precisely. Elevating past level 1 allows you to employ thousands of people, fund massive solutions, and govern resources for broader societal benefit. You cannot govern a city if you are biologically exhausted from carrying bricks all day.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So the goal is to escape survival mode to unlock the capacity to serve. That brings us to level 2, which is unification.
Yes, unification. This is management.
Right, so instead of carrying the bricks, you are organizing the laborers who are carrying the bricks. The earning potential jumps here, perhaps up to $250,000. It requires education, adaptability, and leadership skills to organize people.
Exactly. But even at this management tier, the wealth generation is still fundamentally capped because it's still tied to managing physical labor. To experience an exponential shift, you really have to cross a distinct threshold into the top 2 tiers.
And level 3 is communication.
Yes. The resource deployed here is no longer muscle or management. It is the mouth. This is the realm of podcasters, actors, writers, musicians, public speakers. The wealth unlocked here is exponential because you finally stop trading time for money.
Like, a scriptwriter writes a movie once, but that intellectual property generates revenue globally for decades. Or a musician records a track once, but it streams millions of times while they sleep.
Right. And Proverbs 18.21 is the anchor scripture for this tier. It says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. So words are not just sounds in this framework, they are creative forces. At the communication level, you use your mouth to cast vision, build communities, and rally people to action. Your words create a reality that outlasts your immediate physical effort.
Which brings us to the peak of this matrix, level 4. Imagination, the mind. This is the highest tier of value creation, defined as the ability to see a reality 20 years before it happens.
Yes, this is where the visionaries live. The people who envision global satellite networks, new forms of energy, entirely new economic structures. At level 4, wealth is completely uncapped. It moves into the billions and trillions.
And the brilliance of the matrix is how these 4 levels form a complete ecosystem, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a pipeline. An imaginator at level 4 sees the future. They use level 3, communication, to articulate that invisible future. That communication rallies the level 2 unifiers, who then manage the level 1 implementers, who use their muscle and time to physically build the vision.
It's a perfect supply chain of value. But if this framework is a universal law, there has to be historical proof of it functioning in the real world. And the two biblical case studies provided in the sermon are really fascinating.
They are, especially the first one, because it proves the matrix works so flawlessly, it even functions for illicit or destructive purposes.
Right, the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. That is the ultimate structural test of the matrix.
Exactly. The people gathered on the plain of Shinar possessed one language, so they had mastered level 3, communication. They're completely aligned in their purpose, which is level 2, unification. And they began manufacturing bricks and building a massive structure, which is level 1, implementation.
And then God intervenes in this story, and the reasoning given in the text is incredible.
Yeah, it really is. The text states that because they had mastered communication and unification, whatever they imagined doing so, their imagination would become impossible to stop. Their imagination was perfectly aligned with the lower 3 tiers.
So the only way to halt the process was to confuse their language.
Right. Disrupting their communication collapsed the entire system. It is presented as an inviolable law of physics. If you align the 4 levels, the outcome is basically guaranteed, regardless of the morality of the project.
That is wild to think about. And the second case study maps a single individual's ascent through all 4 levels. Joseph in Genesis 41, he is the quintessential success story of the Matrix.
He really is. And his journey is crucial because it demonstrates that you cannot just parachute into the top tier. You have to earn it. He started at the absolute bottom. He was sold into slavery, thrown into a foreign prison, doing the most menial, grueling tasks imaginable. He was a level 1 implementer.
But he had an imaginator's heart, marked by the visions and dreams of his youth. Still, he was trapped in level 1, but he didn't just sit in his cell hoping someone would notice him. He deployed level 3 communication.
Yes, he interpreted dreams for a fellow prisoner, the butler. And it took time, obviously, but that communication eventually provided him an audience with Pharaoh, the most powerful ruler on earth who had a dream no one else could decipher.
And when Joseph stood before Pharaoh, he did interpret the dream. He warned of 7 years of extreme agricultural abundance, followed by 7 years of devastating famine. But here is the key. If he had stopped at communication, he would have merely been an advisor.
Exactly. Just a consultant.
Right. But he immediately activated level 2. Unification. He handed Pharaoh a comprehensive macroeconomic strategy. He detailed exactly how to aggregate the grain, store it in regional centers, manage the labor force, and govern the distribution during the crisis.
I love how you put this earlier. He didn't just point out that a storm was coming. He handed over the architectural blueprints for a massive storm shelter and volunteered to project manage the construction himself.
Yep. And Pharaoh recognized that Joseph had mastered implementation, unification, and communication. Because of that mastery, Pharaoh promoted him instantly to level 4 imagination. He handed Joseph his signet ring, making him the executive imaginator over the entire Egyptian economy.
But there is a critical warning embedded in Joseph's timeline that the pastor points out. Joseph actually tried to use his communication skills early on. When he interpreted the butler's dream, he begged the butler to mention him to Pharaoh and get him out of prison. But the butler forgot him for 2 full years.
That has to be the most agonizing part of the story.
Oh, for sure. The waiting period is the hardest part to swallow, but it is architecturally necessary. If Joseph had been released early, the timing would have been completely wrong. Pharaoh wouldn't have had his dream yet.
Oh, that's true.
And more importantly, Joseph needed those years of forced implementation and unification in prison to develop the leadership bandwidth required to run a nation. You simply cannot bypass the lower levels. The pressure of level 1 and 2 prepares the structural integrity of your character so you don't just collapse when you are finally handed the weight of level 4.
Wow. Okay, so we have established the theology of the divine blueprint. We understand the mechanics of the 4-tier matrix, and we see the proof in Babel and Joseph. But, as always, the gap between understanding an economic theory and actually changing your life is massive.
Right, which brings us to the weekday work, the specific practical homework the pastor assigns to transition from theory to reality.
Let's get into it.
So the assignments are pretty rigorous. Action 1 is to locate yourself. You have to look objectively at the matrix implementation, unification, communication, imagination, and ruthlessly assess where your primary income and daily energy are currently categorized. You must make a conscious, aggressive decision to cross the threshold into higher value. It requires rejecting that subtle narrative we talked about earlier that staying broke and exhausted is somehow a badge of spiritual honor.
Okay, so total brutal honesty about where you are. What's next?
Action 2 focuses on mastering your mouth. If level 3 communication is the gateway to exponential value, you cannot afford to be reckless with your words. And the specific metric the pastor assigns here is jarring. For every 1 hour you spend talking, you must put in 20 hours of study.
Wait, 20 hours of study for 1 hour of talking? That is a wild ratio.
It is.
Yeah.
But in an era of non-stop broadcasting, social media opinions, instant commentary demanding 20 hours of input for every 1 hour of output is a complete inversion of modern culture. It ensures that when you do speak, your words carry the weight of strategy and substance, not just noise.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and to build this vocabulary, the daily assignment is to read one chapter of the book of Proverbs every day, specifically to absorb ancient wisdom on the power and peril of speech.
Action 3 is targeted Bible study. So the assignment here is to immerse your mind in the source codes of this matrix. Read Genesis 1 and 2 to understand the blueprint. Read Genesis 11 to study the mechanics of Babel. And read Genesis 41 to analyze Joseph's executive strategy.
Yep, and then Action 4 is arguably the most difficult for a modern professional. Create an imaginator room. Yeah, the instruction is a direct challenge to mental laziness. You cannot rely on a brilliant idea randomly striking you while you're stressed out, driving in traffic, or doom scrolling on your phone. You must deliberately carve out time and designate a physical space to sit in silence and intentionally imagine the future.
I can already hear the friction from you listening to this right now. People have kids, demanding jobs, brutal commutes, and just a baseline level of modern exhaustion. The idea of sitting in an empty room to just imagine feels almost impossible for a brain addicted to constant dopamine and distraction. Like the urge to check an email or turn on a show after 3 minutes of silence is overwhelming.
Oh, I totally get it. But that intense discomfort is exactly why it is necessary. You have to vacate the noisy, frantic spaces of survival mode to tune into that divine receiver we talked about. It is a disciplined practice.
Yeah.
And that actually flows directly into Action 5, which offers a practical hack for this.
Okay, what's the hack?
Curate your atmosphere. An example is given in the sermon of a highly successful tailor who plays specific, godly worship music nonstop in his factory.
So the auditory environment literally primes the brain. It creates a frequency where anxiety drops, and the imagination can actually thrive without being suffocated by external stress.
Exactly. And honestly, the design of this entire weekday work merges deep spiritual discipline with high-level executive coaching. The goal is not merely to provide comfort for a difficult week. The expectation is that the audience will internalize this framework, step out of survival mode, and become the visionaries who build the infrastructure, design the cities, and shift the economic trajectory of their communities.
That's incredible. It feels less like a traditional pastoral closing prayer and way more like an assignment from a business coach.
Yes, exactly. That is the point.
So, taking a step back to look at the entire landscape we've covered today, the core premise is that you are walking around with the divine blueprint room already installed in your mind. And by objectively mapping where you sit on the 4 levels of value, understanding the non-negotiable process modeled by Joseph, and committing to the brutal discipline of studying 20 times more than you speak, you can systematically elevate your reality.
It is a profound shift from seeing yourself as just a biological machine meant to labor, to really recognizing yourself as a cognitive architect meant to govern.
Which leaves us with a critical question to examine in our own lives. Think about how much energy you spend optimizing the lower levels of the matrix. You polish your resume, you grind out extra hours at work, you take management courses to become a better unifier, you optimize your logic and your memory to be a better human calculator.
We all do it.
We do. But when was the last time you aggressively blocked off an hour on your calendar, removed every digital distraction, sat in a quiet room, and forced your brain to practice the single most lucrative skill you possess? What if the absolute biggest bottleneck to your next breakthrough isn't a lack of effort, a lack of networking, or a lack of time, but simply your refusal to sit in the quiet and clearly envision it?
Thank you for listening. To go deeper, watch the full message on YouTube or listen to the full-length sermon on Spotify. Follow the podcast, and please share it with someone who needs it and leave your response in the Q&A. Kindly keep your heart on fire, your eyes on Jesus, knowing you are the exception. Grace and peace. We love you deeply.